The alarm rings at 5:47 a.m., same time every morning for the last 3 years. Sarah reaches over, hits the button, and feels that familiar weight in her chest. The weight of knowing she'll probably skip the gym again, probably eat lunch at her desk again, probably promise herself tomorrow will be different, again. But what if I told you that Sarah's biggest mistake isn't her lack of willpower? What if the real problem is that she's trying to climb Mount Everest when she should be walking up a single step? Most people think success requires massive action, dramatic change, life-altering decisions that reshape everything overnight. But the most successful people in the world know a secret that sounds almost too simple to be true. They know that the smallest actions, repeated consistently, create results that seem impossible. This isn't another motivational speech about grinding harder. This is about the hidden psychology that makes consistency inevitable, about why your brain fights you every time you try to change, and about the precise formula that turns microscopic habits into life-changing momentum. Because here's what nobody tells you about transformation. The people who achieve extraordinary things aren't extraordinary people. They're ordinary people who discovered how to work with their psychology instead of against it. They learn to make consistency feel effortless. And once you understand how they do it, you'll never approach change the same way again. Let me show you what I mean. The human brain consumes roughly 20% of your body's total energy. That's more than your heart, your lungs, and your muscles combined. So your brain has evolved one primary mission: conserve energy at all costs. Every time you try to do something new, something different, something that requires effort, your brain treats it like a threat to your survival. This is why motivation fails. This is why willpower runs out. This is why you can feel inspired watching a success story and then struggle to maintain that inspiration for more than a few days. Your brain isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect you from wasting precious energy on uncertain outcomes. But there's a loophole in this system, a backdoor that bypasses your brain's resistance entirely, and it's hiding in plain sight. Stanford behavior scientist B.J. Fogg spent 20 years studying what makes habits stick. He analyzed thousands of attempts at behavior change, and what he discovered will completely change how you think about consistency. The secret isn't in the size of the action, it's in the size of the emotion you feel after completing it. When you do something small and succeed, your brain releases a tiny hit of dopamine. Not enough to notice consciously, but enough to mark that behavior as beneficial. Do it again tomorrow and you get another small hit. Your brain starts to associate the action with reward. The resistance begins to fade. The behavior becomes automatic. But here's where most people get it wrong. They think bigger actions create bigger rewards. So they set massive goals, achieve them once or twice, and then burn out when the effort becomes unsustainable. They're trying to flood their brain with dopamine instead of creating a steady, reliable stream. The most successful people do the opposite. They make their initial actions so small that failure becomes nearly impossible. Not because they lack ambition, but because they understand that consistency beats intensity every single time. James Clear documented this principle in his research on habit formation. He found that people who started with just 2 minutes of daily reading were more likely to become regular readers than those who committed to reading for an hour. People who began with 5 push-ups were more likely to develop a workout routine than those who started with hour-long gym sessions. The reason is psychological. When you complete a tiny action, you're not just doing the action. You're proving to yourself that you're the type of person who follows through. You're building what researchers call identity-based habits. Instead of focusing on what you want to achieve, you focus on who you want to become. This identity shift is everything, because when your actions align with your identity, consistency stops feeling like work. It starts feeling like self-expression. You don't have to force yourself to read because you see yourself as a reader. You don't have to drag yourself to the gym because you see yourself as someone who exercises. But there's a specific way to trigger this identity transformation. And it starts with understanding the 3 layers of behavior change. The first layer is outcomes. This is where most people focus: losing weight, making money, getting promoted. The second layer is processes, the systems and habits that lead to those outcomes. But the third layer is the deepest. It's your identity. your beliefs about who you are and what you're capable of. Most people try to change from the outside in. They set outcome goals and hope their identity will eventually catch up, but lasting change works from the inside out. Every time you complete a small action that aligns with your desired identity, you cast a vote for that version of yourself. The more votes you cast, the stronger that identity becomes. This is why starting small isn't just about building habits. It's about rewiring your fundamental beliefs about what you're capable of. Each tiny success becomes evidence that you're changing, that you're someone who follows through, someone who keeps promises to themselves. And once you have that evidence, something remarkable happens. Your brain stops fighting the behavior and starts supporting it. The same psychological mechanism that once created resistance now creates momentum. What felt impossible begins to feel inevitable. But here's the crucial part that most people miss. The size of your initial action matters less than the consistency of your execution. A single push-up done every day for a month will create more lasting change than 100 push-ups done once. Because the brain doesn't measure progress by intensity. It measures progress by repetition. This is why the most successful people often seem to achieve their goals effortlessly. They're not relying on motivation or willpower. They've trained their brains to see certain behaviors as non-negotiable parts of their identity. The effort happens at the identity level, not at the action level. Think about brushing your teeth. You don't need motivation to do it. You don't rely on willpower to maintain the habit. You brush your teeth because you see yourself as someone who has good hygiene. The behavior feels automatic because it's connected to your identity. Every meaningful change in your life can follow this same pattern, but only if you start small enough to succeed consistently and specific enough to build the identity you want. The question isn't whether you're capable of dramatic transformation. The question is whether you're willing to make that transformation feel boringly simple. Because the most powerful changes often look unremarkable from the outside. They're hidden in the daily decisions that nobody else notices but compound into results that everyone sees. This principle scales beyond personal habits. It applies to relationships, careers, creative projects, and even entire organizations. The companies that dominate their industries rarely do so through dramatic pivots or revolutionary breakthroughs. They do it through consistent, incremental improvements that compound over decades. Consider how Amazon started as a simple online bookstore. Jeff Bezos didn't launch with the intention of becoming the everything store. He focused obsessively on one thing, making the customer experience slightly better each day. Faster shipping, better recommendations, easier returns. Each improvement was small, almost unnoticeable, but they accumulated into an unstoppable competitive advantage. This same compound effect happens in your personal life. The person who reads 10 pages every night doesn't just gain knowledge, they develop the identity of a learner. The person who writes 200 words daily doesn't just improve their craft. They become a writer. The person who saves $5 every day doesn't just build wealth, they transform their relationship with money. But here's where the psychology gets fascinating. Your brain doesn't just track the actions you take, it tracks the promises you keep to yourself. Every time you follow through on a small commitment, you strengthen what researchers call your self-efficacy, your belief in your ability to execute plans and achieve goals. This is why people who succeed in one area of life often succeed in others. It's not because they're naturally gifted or have unlimited willpower. It's because they've trained their brain to trust their own commitments. They've built a reputation with themselves as someone who follows through. The opposite is equally true. Every time you break a promise to yourself, even a small one, you weaken that trust. Your brain starts to treat your own commitments as suggestions rather than certainties. This creates a downward spiral where each failure makes the next failure more likely. This is the real tragedy of setting goals that are too ambitious. When you inevitably fall short, you're not just failing to achieve the outcome. You're teaching your brain that your commitments don't matter. You're eroding the very foundation that all future success depends on. The solution is counterintuitive. Instead of raising the bar higher, you lower it. You make the initial commitment so small that keeping it feels almost trivial. Not because you lack ambition, but because you're playing a deeper game. You're building the psychological infrastructure that makes larger goals possible. Think of it like compound interest for your identity. The person who does one push-up every day for a month isn't just building an exercise habit. They're proving to themselves that they're someone who exercises. That identity becomes the foundation for everything that follows. More push-ups, longer workouts, better nutrition choices, increased energy, improved confidence. But the magic doesn't happen in the action itself. It happens in the moment immediately after completion. That brief pause where you acknowledge what you've done, where you recognize that you kept a promise to yourself. That micro moment of self-recognition is where transformation lives. Most people rush past this moment, they complete the action and immediately move on to the next task. But the most successful people have learned to savor it. They take a conscious second to acknowledge their follow-through, to let their brain register the completion, to feel proud of keeping their word, even about something small. This isn't about being self-congratulatory or setting low standards. It's about understanding how behavior change actually works at the neurological level. Your brain needs clear feedback to form new pathways. When you consciously acknowledge completing a small commitment, you're providing that feedback. You're helping your brain recognize the pattern you want to strengthen. The research on this is overwhelming. Studies show that people who track their habits and celebrate small wins are significantly more likely to maintain those habits long term. Not because tracking itself is magical, but because it forces you to notice and acknowledge your consistency. It makes the invisible process of identity change visible. This is why the most effective habit tracking apps don't just record what you did. They celebrate when you do it. A simple check mark, a streak counter, a visual progress indicator. These aren't just motivational gimmicks. They're psychological tools that help your brain recognize and reinforce the identity you're building. But you don't need an app to harness this principle. You just need intentionality. After completing any small commitment, pause for 3 seconds. Acknowledge what you did. Feel satisfied that you followed through. Let your brain mark the moment as significant. This practice transforms the entire experience of behavior change. Instead of grinding through actions you don't want to do, you start looking forward to those moments of self-recognition. The habit becomes rewarding not just for what it accomplishes, but for what it proves about who you're becoming. And this is where consistency stops being about discipline and starts being about identity maintenance. When you truly see yourself as someone who exercises, missing a workout feels uncomfortable, not because you lack motivation, but because it conflicts with your sense of self. The behavior becomes self-reinforcing. This identity-based approach explains why some people seem to maintain healthy habits effortlessly, while others struggle constantly. The people who make it look easy aren't relying on willpower or motivation. They've aligned their actions with their identity so completely that consistency feels natural. The path to this alignment always starts with the smallest possible step, not because small steps lead to small results, but because they lead to sustainable systems. And sustainable systems, given enough time, create results that seem impossible to anyone watching from the outside. The person who transforms their body didn't do it through extreme workouts or perfect nutrition. They did it by becoming someone who moves their body every day and makes slightly better food choices consistently. The person who builds wealth didn't do it through get-rich-quick schemes or perfect market timing. They did it by becoming someone who saves regularly and invests systematically. The transformation happens so gradually that even they don't notice it day to day. But over months and years, the compound effect becomes undeniable. They look back and can barely recognize the person they used to be, not because they forced dramatic change, but because they allowed consistent small actions to reshape their identity naturally. This is the hidden psychology of consistency. It's not about the actions themselves. It's about the person those actions help you become. And once you understand this distinction, every small step forward becomes both easier to take and infinitely more powerful in its impact. The question isn't whether you're capable of dramatic change. The question is whether you're willing to start so small that change feels inevitable rather than overwhelming. Because the most profound transformations always begin with the simplest actions, repeated with the quiet confidence that small wins, accumulated over time, create the foundation for extraordinary results. And over time, create the foundation for extraordinary results. Sarah never imagined that her biggest breakthrough would come from something so small she almost missed it. 3 months into her journey of microscopic changes, she had established a rhythm: 5 minutes of reading before bed, 1 glass of water upon waking, 2 minutes of stretching during lunch. Actions so tiny they felt almost ridiculous. But then something shifted, not in what she was doing, but in how she was thinking about what she was doing. It happened on a Tuesday morning. As she reached for that single glass of water, a thought flickered through her mind. I'm someone who takes care of herself. Not someone trying to take care of herself, not someone hoping to become healthier, someone who already was. This distinction might seem trivial, but it represents the most profound shift in the psychology of change. When your identity aligns with your actions, the entire game transforms. You stop relying on external motivation and start operating from internal conviction. The neuroscience behind this transformation is remarkable. Brain imaging studies show that when people successfully adopt new behaviors, long-term, specific regions of their brain actually change structure. The anterior cingulate cortex, responsible for decision-making, becomes more efficient. The prefrontal cortex, which governs self-control, develops stronger connections. Most importantly, the brain's default mode network begins to incorporate the new behavior as part of its baseline narrative about who you are. This isn't metaphorical. Your brain literally rewires itself to support the identity you've been consistently demonstrating through your actions. The person who writes for 10 minutes every day doesn't just develop a writing habit. Their brain begins to identify them as a writer. The person who saves $5 daily doesn't just build wealth. Their neural pathways start processing them as someone who values financial security. But here's where most people stumble. They expect this identity shift to happen immediately. They want to feel like a runner after one jog, like an entrepreneur after one business idea, like a healthy person after one salad. When they don't experience that instant transformation, they assume the approach isn't working and abandon it entirely. The reality is that identity change follows a specific timeline that can't be rushed. Researchers have identified 3 distinct phases in the formation of identity-based habits. Understanding these phases is crucial because each one requires a different psychological approach. Phase 1 is mechanical execution. This lasts roughly the first 2 to 8 weeks, depending on the complexity of the behavior. During this phase, the action feels foreign. You're consciously deciding to do something that doesn't yet feel natural. Your brain is still processing the behavior as an exception rather than a rule. The key during this phase is pure consistency without expectation. You're not trying to feel different. You're simply proving to your brain that you're serious about this change. Phase 2 is identity integration. This typically occurs between week 6 and 20. Here, something remarkable happens. The behavior stops feeling like something you do and starts feeling like something you are. You catch yourself naturally gravitating toward choices that align with your emerging identity. A person developing a reading habit finds themselves choosing books over television without conscious deliberation. Someone building an exercise routine starts preferring stairs to elevators without thinking about it. Phase 3 is identity maintenance. This begins around month 4 and continues indefinitely. In this phase, the behavior becomes so integrated into your sense of self that not doing it feels uncomfortable. You've reached what psychologists call identity lock-in. The habit is no longer something you maintain through discipline. It's something you maintain through self-expression. Most people quit during phase 1 because they expect phase 3 results immediately. They're looking for evidence that the change is working before the neural pathways have had time to form. But the most successful people understand that phase 1 is supposed to feel mechanical. That's not a bug in the system. That's the system working exactly as designed. This understanding completely changes how you approach the inevitable moments when motivation wanes. Instead of interpreting low motivation as evidence that you should quit, you recognize it as proof that you're in phase 1, where motivation is irrelevant. You're not trying to feel inspired. You're trying to build neural pathways through repetition. Sarah discovered this principle firsthand. Around week 4 of her micro-habits, she woke up one morning feeling completely unmotivated. The voice in her head was loud and persistent. This isn't working. You're still the same person. Why bother with these tiny actions? But instead of listening to that voice, Sarah remembered something she'd learned about the psychology of change. The moments when you feel most like quitting are often the moments when the most important neural rewiring is happening. Your brain is testing whether this new behavior is truly a priority or just another temporary experiment. She did her 2 minutes of stretching anyway, not because she wanted to, but because she had committed to proving something to her brain about who she was becoming. That single moment of following through despite zero motivation became a turning point, not because the action itself was significant, but because she demonstrated that her commitment transcended her feelings. This is the hidden power of starting small. When the barrier to action is low, you can maintain consistency even when motivation is absent. A person committed to reading 1 page can do it while exhausted. Someone committed to 5 push-ups can do them while stressed. The size of the action becomes irrelevant compared to the power of the commitment. But there's another layer to this psychology that most people never discover. The most transformative habits aren't just small, they're strategically chosen to create what researchers call cascading effects. These are changes that naturally lead to other positive changes without additional effort or willpower. Take Sarah's simple habit of drinking 1 glass of water upon waking. This tiny action began to influence other areas of her life in unexpected ways. The act of hydrating first thing in the morning improved her energy levels, which made her more likely to choose nutritious foods throughout the day. Better hydration improved her sleep quality, which enhanced her mood and decision-making capacity. One microscopic change created a ripple effect that touched every aspect of her daily experience. The key to identifying these cascading habits is understanding what psychologists call keystone behaviors. These are actions that, while small in themselves, have the power to trigger positive changes in other areas of your life. Exercise is a classic keystone behavior. People who start exercising regularly often spontaneously improve their diet, sleep better, become more productive at work, and experience enhanced relationships. Tomorrow morning, when your alarm rings, you'll face the same choice Sarah faced for 3 years. You can hit snooze and remain trapped in the cycle of broken promises. Or you can choose one action so small it feels almost insignificant. 1 push-up, 1 page, 1 glass of water. Because the most extraordinary transformations don't begin with extraordinary actions. They begin with ordinary people who understand that consistency isn't about perfection. It's about identity. Your future self is waiting. Start building them today.